The cafeteria hummed with quiet conversations and shuffling papers. But when Caleb Mercer, a worn-down single father, walked into parent-teacher night holding his daughter Sophie's mittened hand, the noise faded. Whispers followed him, until her teacher stood up and said something that stopped every heart in the room. Before we dive in, drop a comment with where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this. Let's begin. Snow came down in thin, quiet sheets, the kind that didn't look dangerous, until it soaked your sleeves, froze at your cuffs, and reminded you how alone the night could feel. Caleb Mercer walked fast anyway, shoulders hunched, one hand gripping his 7-year-old daughter's mitten like it was the last warm thing left in the city. Chicago's streetlights turned the snow into glitter, but Caleb didn't have time to admire it. He was late. Again. "Daddy," Sophie whispered, looking up through the falling flakes. "Are you mad?" He forced a smile. "No, Peanut. Just thinking. Thinking about the tow yard job he'd left early. Thinking about the delivery shift waiting after this. Thinking about the rent notice folded in his wallet like a shameful secret. Thinking about how he'd promised Sophie that tonight would be different, because parent-teacher night mattered. Inside the school, heat hit them like a wall. The cafeteria buzzed with parents in clean coats, cologne, perfume, the soft confidence of people who didn't check their bank accounts before buying lunch. Caleb's boots squeaked on wet tile. He wiped Sophie's hair with his sleeve and immediately regretted it, grease stain. He saw the looks. The quick scan from his worn jacket to his chapped hands. The whisper that always floated around men like him. Single dad. Always tired. Barely holding it together. Caleb found Sophie's teacher's table, mess. Bennett, near the back. Sophie tugged him toward the little chair beside hers. "Sit," she said like it was an order. He sat, knees creaking, back tense. Ms. Bennett wasn't there yet. On the table lay a stack of papers and a folder with Sophie's name. Caleb's throat tightened. He expected the usual, Sophie's smart but distracted. Sophie's kind but quiet. Sophie needs more support at home. He was already preparing to apologize, like he always did, when the microphone squealed. A woman's voice steadied the room. "Excuse me, everyone. Before we begin conferences." Ms. Bennett stood at the front, holding something in her hands. A drawing. The chatter thinned to silence, as if the entire cafeteria had exhaled at once. Caleb's stomach dropped. Sophie's fingers squeezed his. Ms. Bennett's eyes searched the room, then settled on Caleb. "Mr. Mercer, could you stand for a moment?" Caleb blinked. His face warmed. All eyes turned. He wanted to refuse. He wanted to melt into the floor. But Sophie looked up at him with a small, proud smile, like she'd been waiting for this. Caleb stood. Ms. Bennett lifted the drawing higher. It wasn't a castle. No princess. No cartoon rainbow. It was a man in a garage, kneeling beside a car with the hood up. His hands were drawn big and dark, smeared with gray crayon like oil. Next to him stood a little girl holding out a sandwich. Above them, in crooked letters pressed too hard into the paper, were 2 words. "My hero." A ripple moved through the parents. Not laughter, something quieter. Heavier. Ms. Bennett's voice softened. "Sophie wrote an essay for our winter writing project. The prompt was, 'Who makes you feel safe?'" Caleb's lungs forgot how to work. "She didn't write about superheroes," Ms. Bennett continued. "She wrote about her father." Sophie leaned against his leg. Caleb felt her trembling, or maybe it was his own. Ms. Bennett read a few lines, just enough to land like truth on every table in the room. How her dad always shows up, even when he looks like he's falling asleep standing up. How he pretends he ate dinner at work so she won't worry. How he carries her backpack because her shoulders are too small for heavy things. How he makes hot cocoa with water when the milk is gone and tells her it's a special recipe. Parents shifted in their seats. One mother lowered her eyes. Another pressed her lips together like she'd swallowed guilt. Caleb stared at his boots, wishing the floor would open. Ms. Bennet paused, then looked directly at him again. And when I asked Sophie what she would wish for, if she could wish for anything. Her voice cracked, just a little. She wrote, I wish my dad could get one real night of sleep. Just one. The cafeteria was silent in a way that hurt. Caleb's eyes burned. He swallowed hard, jaw locked, refusing to break in front of strangers. Sophie whispered, It's okay, Daddy. I meant it nice. He nodded, unable to speak. That's when Ms. Bennet reached into her folder and pulled out a sealed envelope. She held it like it weighed something more than paper. This is not something I normally do publicly, she said. But I believe tonight is the right time. She walked down the aisle and placed the envelope into Caleb's shaking hands. He stared at it, confused, terrified, hopeful, every emotion fighting for space in his chest. And then, from the far side of the room, he felt it. Not pity. Not judgment. A different kind of attention. A man in a charcoal coat stood near the exit, watching Caleb too closely, like he recognized him. Caleb's stomach went cold, colder than the snow outside. Because for a second, just a second, Caleb thought he recognized him too. And whatever was inside that envelope, it suddenly didn't feel like the only thing about to change. Before we continue, write in the comments where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe, because what happened next didn't just reward a father's sacrifice. It dragged a buried past back into the light. Caleb stared at the envelope like it could bite. Sophie pressed against his side, her cheek warm through his thin jacket. Around them, the cafeteria had gone unnaturally still, parents frozen mid-sip, mid-whisper, like the whole room had agreed not to breathe until he did the one thing everyone suddenly wanted. Ms. Bennet's voice softened. Mr. Mercer. I normally wouldn't do this during parent-teacher night. But after what Sophie wrote, open it. His rough thumb slid under the flap. Paper rasped. His hands were steady only because he had learned, over years, how to keep them steady when everything inside him was falling apart. The letter wasn't typed. It was handwritten. He read the first line and felt the air leave his lungs. Mr. Mercer, I've watched Sophie grow this year. She is bright, creative, and kind, but she carries the weight of your exhaustion. His throat tightened. No child should have to worry whether her father is too tired to wake up tomorrow. Caleb blinked hard, but his eyes burned anyway. Ms. Bennet continued, gently, as if she could see the memories he didn't talk about. I don't know your whole story. But I know you show up. Every morning. Every meeting. Every day. He read on. That's why I nominated Sophie for the District Scholars Program. Caleb's knees nearly buckled. Scholarship, he whispered, and the word sounded wrong in his mouth. Too clean, too expensive, too impossible. Ms. Bennet nodded. A full academic scholarship. Tutoring. Mentorship. Supplies. Enrichment programs. Everything. Sophie tugged his sleeve, eyes wide and shining. Does that mean, art books? Real ones? Caleb dropped to one knee so fast his back protested. He cupped her cheek with a trembling hand. Yeah, Peanut, he managed. Real ones. A ripple of sound moved through the room, gasps, murmurs, someone quietly saying, "Oh my God." Not everyone was moved. A tall man in a pressed coat near the back scoffed, loud enough to slice through the warmth. So what? A scholarship doesn't fix poverty. One free ride won't cover her whole life. Caleb's jaw tightened. He tasted iron, the old anger he kept buried because anger didn't pay bills. He turned, ready to answer, ready to defend Sophie's pride with his own. But Miss Bennet beat him to it. Her eyes flashed. "Sometimes all it takes is one opportunity," she said, voice firm. "And when you give it to the right child, backed by the right parent, it changes everything." Silence returned, heavier now, because the truth had landed. From the corner, the principal, Mr. Delgado, cleared his throat. "Mr. Mercer, there's something else." Caleb stiffened. His mind immediately went to paperwork. Fees. Some catch. "We're forming a parent advisory board," Delgado said. "And we need someone who represents working families. Too often, only the wealthy voices fill this room. Would you consider joining?" Caleb blinked. "Me? Sir, I'm just a father who shows up," Delgado interrupted calmly. "That's what matters." Sophie looked up at him like he'd been handed a cape. "Daddy, you'd be a superhero for the parents." A few people laughed, softly, not cruelly. For once, the laughter didn't sting. Then, as the meeting ended and families began to drift toward the exits, Ms. Bennet touched Caleb's elbow. "One more thing." She handed him a plain envelope, heavier than the first. "It's from the PTA Assistance Fund," she said quietly. "Grocery cards. Gas vouchers. A prepaid card for winter clothes. It isn't charity, Mr. Mercer. It's community." Caleb opened it and froze. He wanted to refuse. Pride screamed at him to push it back. But then he remembered Sophie's wish, one real night of sleep. His hands shook as he whispered, "Thank you." And that's when he felt it again, that stare. The man in the charcoal coat had moved closer, standing where the shadows from the hallway lights cut his face in half. Up close, Caleb could see the expensive watch, the controlled posture, and something familiar in the eyes. The man spoke low, so only Caleb could hear. "Caleb Mercer," he said, like the name tasted old. "I knew I recognized you." Caleb's stomach dropped to ice. Because there were only two kinds of people who used his full name like that. People from his past. And people who wanted to drag it into the present. The hallway outside the cafeteria smelled like wet wool and old disinfectant. Parents passed in clusters, laughing softly, checking phones, calling kids toward exits glowing with winter light. Caleb stood still. The man in the charcoal coat didn't. He stepped closer, movements controlled, deliberate, someone used to rooms shifting when he entered them. Up close, he looked mid-40s, clean-shaven, hair touched with silver at the temples. Wealth sat on him without apology. "Relax," the man said quietly. "I'm not here to cause a scene." Caleb's jaw tightened. "Then say what you came to say." The man studied him, eyes sharp, calculating. "You don't remember me, do you?" Caleb shook his head once. "I remember enough people who'd rather I didn't exist." A faint smile touched the man's mouth, more sad than amused. "Fair." He extended a hand. "My name is Nathaniel Cross." Caleb didn't take it. The name hit him like a dull echo. Not recognition, something worse. Association. Cross noticed the hesitation. "You knew my brother." Caleb's chest constricted. 10 years collapsed in on themselves. A warehouse. Snow piling against corrugated steel. A forklift alarm screaming too late. Blood on concrete that never quite washed out of his memory. "I worked with a Cross," Caleb said slowly. "Doesn't mean I knew him." "You saved his life once," Nathaniel replied. Caleb swallowed. "I tried." Silence stretched. "My brother died 6 months later," Nathaniel said. No accusation. Just fact. Different job. Different city. But before he did, he talked about you. Caleb closed his eyes for a second. He could still hear the shouting. The panic. The moment he'd pulled a man clear while everyone else froze. "I didn't save him enough," Caleb said. Nathaniel studied him like he was weighing something unseen. "He said you were the only man who didn't run." Footsteps echoed behind them. Sophie tugged at Caleb's coat. "Daddy, are we going?" Caleb knelt, forcing calm into his voice. "Yeah, sweetheart. Just a minute." Nathaniel crouched too, lowering himself to Sophie's level. "You must be the artist." Sophie tilted her head. "Do I know you?" "No," he said gently. "But I know your dad." She looked at Caleb. "Is he nice?" Caleb held his breath. Nathaniel smiled, real this time. "Your father is rare." Something in Sophie seemed to decide. She nodded once, satisfied, then skipped ahead toward the doors. Nathaniel stood. "I didn't come to reopen wounds. I came to apologize." Caleb laughed, short, humorless. "For what?" "For thinking money makes men," Nathaniel said. "I've funded schools, hospitals, programs. And tonight a 7-year-old reminded me I missed something important." Caleb's guard stayed up. "You don't owe me anything." "No," Nathaniel agreed. "But I owe my brother's memory honesty." He reached into his coat and handed Caleb a card. Nathaniel Cross. Cross Urban Logistics. Caleb stared at it. He knew the name now. A corporate giant. Warehouses across the Midwest. "You're hiring," Nathaniel said. "Operations supervisor. Day shift. Full benefits." Caleb shook his head immediately. "I don't take pity jobs." Nathaniel's gaze didn't waver. "Good. Because this isn't pity." He leaned closer. "I've read your file." Caleb stiffened. "My what?" "Forklift certification. Safety commendations. One incident report where you took the blame for a supervisor who violated protocol." Caleb's jaw clenched. That night had cost him his career. "You disappeared after that," Nathaniel continued. 2 jobs. No complaints. No lawsuits. No excuses." He paused. "That's integrity." Caleb felt the old anger rise. "Integrity didn't pay my daughter's lunch account." Nathaniel nodded. "Then let it pay your future." They stood there, snow pressing against the glass doors, the city humming beyond them. "Think about it," Nathaniel said. "Come by tomorrow." He turned to leave, then stopped. "One more thing." Caleb looked up. "I didn't recognize you because of the warehouse," Nathaniel said quietly. "I recognized you because you're the man who once carried my brother through snow and refused to let go." The doors closed behind him. Caleb stood frozen, card burning in his hand. For the first time in years, the past hadn't come back to punish him. It had come back, to offer a way forward. That night, sleep didn't come. Caleb lay on the couch, staring at the ceiling while the radiator ticked like a clock counting down something he couldn't see. Sophie slept curled in her room, one arm wrapped around a sketchbook she refused to put down after parent-teacher night. Every few minutes, Caleb checked the crack under her door, reassured by the soft glow of the nightlight. The business card lay on the coffee table. Cross Urban Logistics. Operations supervisor. Day shift. Caleb had read the words so many times they'd lost meaning and become dangerous, like hope. He'd learned the hard way not to trust sudden turns of fortune. 10 years ago, he'd trusted a supervisor who cut corners. Trusted that doing the right thing quietly would matter. Trusted that truth would protect him. Instead, he'd been labeled difficult. Then replaceable. Then unemployed. By morning, the card was still there. Caleb walked Sophie to school through fresh snow, the city unusually bright under a pale winter sun. Parents nodded to him now. One mother smiled. A father held the door open. Recognition, Caleb realized, could feel just as disorienting as judgment. At the bus stop, Sophie looked up at him. "Daddy, are you okay?" He crouched. "Why? You're thinking with your loud face." He laughed despite himself. "I might go talk to someone about a job today." Her eyes widened. "A stay-home-for-dinner job?" He hesitated. "Maybe." She wrapped her arms around his neck. "Then you should be brave." The word hit him harder than any insult ever had. By noon, Caleb stood in the lobby of Cross Urban Logistics. Glass, steel, warmth. A world that hadn't been built for men like him. Nathaniel Cross met him without ceremony. No assistance. No power games. They talked, not about sympathy, but about systems. Safety. People. Caleb spoke carefully at first, then with growing confidence. He pointed out inefficiencies, risks, things he'd noticed over years of invisible labor. Nathaniel listened. At the end, he slid a folder across the table. Salary. Benefits. Hours that ended before dark. Caleb's hands shook, not from disbelief, but from fear of losing it. "I need one thing in writing," Caleb said quietly. Nathaniel raised an eyebrow. "If I see corners being cut," Caleb continued, "I say something. If it costs me this job, so be it." Nathaniel smiled. "That's why you're here." Caleb signed. That evening, he cooked dinner instead of reheating leftovers. Sophie helped, standing on a chair, proudly stirring boxed pasta like it was a feast. They ate at the table. Together. Later, as snow drifted past the windows, Caleb tucked Sophie into bed. "Daddy," she whispered. "Yeah, Peanut? Did I do good?" Caleb swallowed, voice thick. "You did amazing." She smiled and fell asleep instantly, unburdened. Caleb stood there a long time, realizing something quietly life-changing. For the first time since his wife died, he wasn't surviving. He was building. And somewhere in the city, beneath the same falling snow, a man who once measured success in profit margins had finally understood the value of a father who never stopped showing up. One night remained before everything changed for good. The first morning of Caleb's new job came quietly. No alarms screaming before dawn. No rushed coffee burned on a hot plate. No knot of dread tightening in his chest before the day even began. He woke before Sophie, out of habit more than necessity, and stood by the window watching snow drift through the amber glow of the streetlights. The city looked softer this early, like it was giving him permission to believe. At breakfast, Sophie studied him carefully. "You're smiling again," she said between bites of toast. He laughed. "Am I?" She nodded. "You do that when things aren't heavy." The words landed gently, but deep. Walking her to school, Caleb noticed how his steps felt different. Not lighter exactly. Stronger. Like his feet finally trusted the ground beneath them. That afternoon, he stood on the operations floor at Cross Urban Logistics, wearing a new jacket that still felt strange on his shoulders. Workers glanced at him with curiosity, some skeptical, some hopeful. Caleb gathered them together. "I'm not here to be above you," he said. "I'm here to make sure everyone goes home safe. Every night." There were nods. Quiet ones. The kind that mattered. Weeks passed. Bills stopped stacking up. Sophie brought home library books instead of overdue notices. Caleb made it to school pickups, parent meetings, dinners that stretched into laughter instead of exhaustion. One evening, the principal called him into the school office. "Mr. Mercer," she said warmly, the district has approved Sophie's scholarship. Officially. Caleb closed his eyes. When he told Sophie, she didn't scream or jump. She hugged him. Hard. Winter slowly gave way to longer days, but the cold never quite left the story. It stayed in memory, in contrast, in gratitude. On the last snow of the season, Caleb and Sophie walked home together beneath glowing streetlights, their breath still visible, their hands still linked. You know, Sophie said thoughtfully, I don't need a hero anymore. Caleb looked down, concerned. You don't? She smiled up at him. Because I already have one. They stopped at the corner, snow settling around them, the city humming softly in the background. Caleb realized then that success hadn't arrived with money or titles. It arrived the moment someone finally saw what had always been there. A father who never quit. A child who believed. And a future shaped not by luck, but by quiet, unwavering love. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs to be reminded that kindness is never wasted. Thanks for watching. Like and subscribe for more stories that stay with you.